Before I tell you anything else, I need you to know one thing. The night I found out my husband was planning to destroy me, I didn't cry for long. I didn't scream. I didn't even wake him up. I made a list. And by the time I was done with that list, 14 months later, the man who thought he'd planned everything down to the last detail didn't even see it coming until it was already over. My name is Renata. This is the full story, and trust me, there are parts of this that even the people closest to me still don't know. 14 years ago, I met Daniel at a culinary trade show that smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax. I was 26. He was 30, talking about opening the kind of bakery that makes people cry a little when they taste the bread. I laughed at him. By the end of the week, I'd given him my number. By the end of the year, I'd quit my job to help him open Maddox & Co. I should have paid more attention to that name. Not Daniel and Renata. Maddox & Co. his name. I never thought twice about it because back then what was his was ours. We got married 18 months later in a backyard with mismatched chairs and a cake we baked ourselves at 2 in the morning. He cried during his vows. I thought I'd found the kindest man on earth. The early years were brutal 7-day weeks, thin margins, the constant fear of missing rent. But we were a team. When the bakery finally turned a profit in year 4, we celebrated with cold pizza on the kitchen floor because we were too tired to sit at a table. By year 9, Maddox & Co. had 3 locations, a wholesale deal with 2 grocery chains, and 18 employees. I ran operations. Daniel was the face, the charm, the interviews, the ribbon cuttings. I was fine with that. I never wanted the spotlight. On paper, I owned 35%. We talked about changing it to 50-50 eventually. Eventually never came. By year 12, something had shifted: more supplier meetings, more overnight trips, a phone that now lived face down on the counter. I told myself it was midlife. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until almost 2 years later, was that the woman who would eventually try to take everything from me had already walked into Daniel's life by then. They'd met at a hotel bar in Austin 3 weeks before our 12th anniversary. 3 weeks. I still have the photo from that anniversary. The one where he's smiling at the camera with his arm around me, looking exactly the way he always did. I didn't know it yet, but the countdown had already started. The first real crack came on an ordinary Thursday in March. Sandra, our bookkeeper of 9 years, knocked on my office door with a strange look on her face. "I think there's an error in the equipment loan account," she said. $180,000 taken out 4 months ago. I don't remember approving the paperwork, and there's no equipment in our inventory that matches it. My stomach dropped, the way it does when you miss a stare in the dark. The signatures on the loan were Daniel's and mine, except I had never signed it. It was close. Whoever forged it had practiced, but it wasn't mine. I know my own signature the way I know my own face. I told Sandra I'd look into it, closed the door, and sat very still for a long time. But here's the part that still gives me chills. 2 days later, while quietly going through old filing cabinets looking for the original loan paperwork from when we bought the building, just to compare signatures, I found something else. Tucked behind a folder of old tax returns was a second folder, one I'd never seen before, labeled simply, "Reference." Inside were photocopies, my driver's license, my passport, a bank statement from an account that had been closed for almost 6 years, one I barely remembered having. Someone had been collecting samples of my identity, carefully, methodically, for longer than 4 months. I sat there holding that folder, and for the first time the fear wasn't abstract anymore. This wasn't a man having a midlife crisis. This was something that had been planned, and I had no idea yet how far back it went or who else might be involved. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, sleeping like the dead, which I now understand was guilt finally catching up with his nervous system, I did something I had never done in 12 years of marriage. I went through his phone. His passcode was our wedding date. He used to say it reminded him of the best day of his life every time he unlocked his phone. I used to think that was sweet. What I found took almost 3 hours because I kept having to stop, breathe, and start again. Her name was Celeste, 31, a professional headshot for a profile photo, the kind people use for real estate listings. They'd met based on the earliest messages almost 2 years ago, in Austin, 3 weeks before our 12th anniversary. The messages didn't stay flirty for long. Within months, Daniel was telling Celeste he loved her. Within 8 months, he was telling her he was figuring out how to get out of his marriage the smart way, and then, a sentence I will never forget. "I'm not walking away from 14 years of work with nothing. I built this. She just helped. She just helped. I'd given up the chance to have children because we agreed the business needed everything we had. I'd mortgaged my own credit during a payroll crisis in year 3. She just helped." The deeper I went, the worse it got. The loan wasn't an accident, it was step 1. Once the loan clears and the cash is moved, I'll start the process. By the time she realizes what's happening, there won't be anything left to fight over. I'll offer her the house, she'll think she's getting the better deal. He was going to make me think I'd won, while making sure I'd actually lost everything. And then I found the message that connected everything, the one that explained the reference folder. It was from Celeste, sent 4 months earlier. "My cousin says he can get it done clean, but he needs better copies of her ID. Can you get into the file cabinet again without her noticing?" Her cousin. I sat on the bathroom floor at 4 in the morning, and for the first time, the fear had a shape. Celeste's cousin, whoever he was, apparently had some kind of access or skill that made forging documents clean. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This was a small operation with at least 3 people involved, and I had just found out about it by accident. 2 days after finding a folder of my own identification documents hidden in my own filing cabinet. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it. I went to bed. The next morning, I made Daniel his coffee, smiled at him over the rim of my mug, and said absolutely nothing. "But I want you to remember that name, Celeste's cousin, because he comes back later, and when he does, it changes everything." For the next 5 months, I became the most agreeable version of myself Daniel had ever seen. I stopped asking about his travel schedule. I told him, unprompted, that I'd been thinking about how hard he worked and that he deserved more time to himself. People who think they're winning get careless. I was counting on that. Here's what I did during those 5 months. I documented everything. Every time Daniel left his phone unattended, I photographed messages, not just proof of the affair but proof of intent and timeline, which is what would matter legally. I went to Sandra and told her carefully that I believed my signature had been forged on the equipment loan. I asked her to keep doing her job exactly as always, but to quietly timestamp and save any unusual account activity, just in case we ever needed to show an auditor a clear picture. I went to Priya, our accountant, and asked her to put together a complete financial picture of the business, every account, loan, and asset, down to the cent. I hired Teresa Aucaffer, a lawyer who specialized in business fraud and divorce cases that overlapped. I brought her everything: the screenshots, the signature comparison, the reference folder, Priya's financials, and the loan documents. Teresa read through it all in near silence. When she finished, she looked up and said, "He forged your signature on a document tied to commercial real estate you co-own. That's bank fraud, and the fact that someone was actively collecting copies of your ID suggests this could escalate into identity theft charges as well. Has anything else been opened in your name? Credit cards, accounts, anything?" I told her I didn't think so. "Check," she said, "today before anything else." That night I pulled my credit report for the first time in years. There it was, an account I had never opened. A credit line opened 3 months earlier, currently sitting at a balance of $34,000, and the billing address on file wasn't my home. It was an address 2 blocks from Maddox & Co.'s flagship location. An address that, when Teresa's investigator looked it up the next day, turned out to belong to a small private mailbox service, the kind of place people use specifically so that statements don't show up at their actual home. Someone had opened a credit line in my name and was funneling charges to a P.O. box near the bakery, where Daniel would have easy, daily access to intercept the statements before I ever saw them. I almost confronted him that night. I came so close. But Teresa's words kept replaying in my head: "Let him show you everything on his own timeline before he knows you're watching." So I waited. But I want you to know, that close call, sitting across the dinner table from Daniel that night, looking at him laugh at something on TV, while a $34,000 debt sat quietly accumulating in my name 2 blocks away. That was the night I stopped feeling guilty about anything I was about to do. Over the following 2 months, I watched Daniel's plan unfold exactly as he described it to Celeste. The $180,000 from the equipment loan moved, in 3 chunks, into a business development account I'd never been told about. From there, smaller amounts moved into Celeste's personal account. But the credit line was different. That money wasn't going to Celeste at all. It was going somewhere else entirely. A string of payments to a company called Bright Horizon Consulting LLC, $2,000 to $4,000 at a time, always just under the threshold that would trigger an automatic fraud review. It took Teresa's investigator 4 days to find out who owned Bright Horizon Consulting. It was registered to a man named Marcus Reyes, Celeste's cousin, so now I knew exactly what was happening. Daniel wasn't just draining the business and planning to leave me with a house worth less than I thought. He, or more likely Celeste and Marcus with Daniel's knowledge, was also running up debt in my name, debt that would still exist after the divorce, debt that would follow me for years, quietly destroying my credit and my ability to ever rebuild on my own, even after I'd won the house. It was insurance. If anything ever went wrong with their plan, if I somehow ended up keeping more than they expected, I'd still be drowning in debt I didn't know existed for years to come. Around this time, Daniel started casually suggesting we talk to a financial planner together, just to make sure everything's in order. I recognized it for what it was, step one of the conversation where he'd suggest restructuring our finances, right before announcing he wanted a divorce. I told him that sounded like a great idea and even suggested a date. 3 weeks before that meeting, Daniel announced he wanted to throw a party for our 14th anniversary to celebrate everything we've built. Teresa and I both recognized it immediately. His exit ceremony, a warm, well-documented final memory of us, so that when the divorce came, everyone would already have a story in their heads, two people who loved each other and just grew apart. I told him the party sounded wonderful. And then I started planning my own event to happen at it, except by now, my plan had grown a second target. Because Marcus Reyes, it turned out, was on the guest list too. Celeste had asked Daniel, weeks earlier, if her cousin could come as her plus one, and Daniel, never imagining I'd ever know who Marcus was, had said yes. He was inviting the man who'd forged my signature and opened a fraudulent account in my name to our 14th wedding anniversary party. The party was held at our flagship bakery, String Lights, a long table covered in food we'd made ourselves, 40 guests including family, longtime staff, and old friends who remembered the cold pizza on the kitchen floor. Daniel gave a toast about 14 incredible years and the journey. Someone's grandmother cried. I stood up next. I thanked everyone for coming and meant every word about the early years, the late nights, the people in that room who'd been with us since the beginning. Then I said I had an announcement of my own, an anniversary surprise for Daniel. After 14 years, I'd had paperwork drawn up to formalize something that should have happened long ago, adjusting my ownership stake from 35% to 50%, as a gift to myself, if you will, for 14 years of partnership. Daniel, caught completely off guard in front of 40 witnesses on a night built around the image of us, could either object and reveal on his anniversary that he had a problem with formally recognizing his wife as an equal partner, or smile, play along and sign. He signed. Teresa, quietly present as an old family friend, notarized it on the spot. That alone would have been enough for one night. But I wasn't finished. Before I sat back down, I turned, almost as an afterthought, toward Celeste, who was standing near the dessert table next to a man I'd never officially been introduced to. Celeste, right? I said warmly. Daniel's mentioned you do marketing consulting, isn't that right? And this must be your cousin Marcus, Bright Horizon Consulting? I have never in my entire life seen two people's faces change so fast. I smiled the way you'd smile at any new acquaintance and said, it's so nice to finally put faces to names. I've heard so much about both of you. Then I turned back to the room, raised my glass and said, to 14 years and to everyone here who's been part of this story in ways big and small. Everyone raised their glasses. Daniel, Celeste, and Marcus raised theirs too, frozen smiles on all three faces. None of them having any idea exactly how much I knew, only that I clearly knew something, and that I had just said two names out loud, Bright Horizon Consulting and Marcus, that none of them had ever told me. The party ended an hour later. Daniel didn't sleep that night. I know, because I didn't either, though, for very different reasons. The party was held at our flagship bakery, String Lights, a long table covered in food we'd made ourselves, 40 guests including family, longtime staff, and old friends who remembered the cold pizza on the kitchen floor. Daniel gave a toast about 14 incredible years and the journey. Someone's grandmother cried. I stood up next. I thanked everyone for coming and meant every word about the early years, the late nights, the people in that room who'd been with us since the beginning. Then I said I had an announcement of my own, an anniversary surprise for Daniel. After 14 years, I'd had paperwork drawn up to formalize something that should have happened long ago, adjusting my ownership stake from 35% to 50%. As a gift to myself, if you will, for 14 years of partnership. Daniel, caught completely off guard in front of 40 witnesses on a night built around the image of us, could either object and reveal on his anniversary that he had a problem with formally recognizing his wife as an equal partner, or smile, play along and sign. He signed. Teresa, quietly present as an old family friend, notarized it on the spot. That alone would have been enough for one night. But I wasn't finished. Before I sat back down, I turned almost as an afterthought toward Celeste, who was standing near the dessert table next to a man I'd never officially been introduced to. Celeste, right? I said warmly. Daniel's mentioned you do marketing consulting, isn't that right? And this must be your cousin Marcus, Bright Horizon Consulting? I have never in my entire life seen two people's faces change so fast. I smiled the way you'd smile at any new acquaintance and said, it's so nice to finally put faces to names. I've heard so much about both of you. Then I turned back to the room, raised my glass and said, to 14 years and to everyone here who's been part of this story in ways big and small. Everyone raised their glasses. Daniel, Celeste, and Marcus raised theirs too, frozen smiles on all three faces. None of them having any idea exactly how much I knew, only that I clearly knew something, and that I had just said two names out loud, Bright Horizon Consulting and Marcus, that none of them had ever told me. The party ended an hour later. Daniel didn't sleep that night. I know because I didn't either, though for very different reasons. 2 days later, Teresa filed the fraud report on the forged loan documents. With my ownership now locked at 50% notarized, witnessed 2 days before the report, the investigation covered both the loan itself and the funds that had been moved into Celeste's account. On the same day, we filed a separate fraud report with the credit bureau and the issuing bank regarding the $34,000 credit line opened in my name, with documentation tracing the payments directly to Bright Horizon Consulting LLC, Marcus Reyes. Here's something I didn't expect. Celeste panicked first. Within a week, Celeste's account, the one that had received the loan funds, was frozen as part of the fraud investigation. Marcus, facing his own exposure for the credit line scheme, apparently told Celeste that if this went any further he wasn't going down alone, and that Daniel had set the whole thing up and could take the fall for the original loan, since it was his signature that authorized everything on the business end. Celeste, it turned out, had texted Daniel exactly that, Marcus's threat, word for word, not realizing that Daniel's phone at that point had already been flagged as evidence and was, per Teresa's advice, no longer something I had access to, but something a forensic accountant working with the investigation absolutely did. Daniel's the smart way plan had a fatal flaw he never saw coming. He had built his entire exit strategy on the assumption that I was the only one who'd never figure out what was happening. He never accounted for the fact that the people helping him were just as willing to turn on each other the moment things got difficult, and that everything they said to each other, while panicking, became evidence too. In the divorce proceedings, my 50% ownership meant Daniel could no longer simply hand me the house and walk away with the business. The forged loan, the documented premeditation, and his role in a credit fraud scheme targeting his own wife meant Teresa argued, successfully, that his conduct constituted both marital and business misconduct. Daniel's ownership stake was reduced to cover the legal costs, fines, and restitution tied to the fraud. His responsibility, not the company's and not mine. The $34,000 fraudulent credit line was, after investigation, removed from my credit history entirely, with the bank pursuing Marcus directly. I became majority owner of Maddox & Co. 68%. I changed the name within a month. It's called Renata's now. People ask if I regret waiting. I understand why. There were nights I lay next to a man I knew was planning to destroy me, smiling at him over coffee the next morning, feeling like I was losing a piece of myself every single day I stayed quiet. But if I'd confronted him that first night, over the loan, or even after finding the affair, he would have denied it. and he'd have had time to cover his tracks before anyone outside our marriage even knew there was anything to investigate. Celeste and Marcus would have had time to close accounts, move money, disappear. It would have become his word against mine, and he was the charming one, the face of the company. I'm not at all confident I'd have come out ahead. Instead, I let all three of them show me exactly who they were in their own words on their own timeline, and then I made sure that by the time they realized I knew, there was nothing left to control, and no one left for them to blame but each other. I don't feel triumphant. I feel something quieter. Relief mostly, and something like respect for the version of myself that sat on a bathroom floor at 4 in the morning, holding a folder of her own stolen identity, and decided to get organized instead of falling apart. Daniel still lives in town. I see him occasionally, both of us pretending to check our phones. Celeste moved away not long after the investigation became public. Marcus, I'm told, is dealing with his own legal troubles that have nothing to do with me anymore. What I think about now is Tuesday mornings, sun through the front windows, the smell of bread rising before the doors open. Sandra still does the books. Priya still does the taxes, and now she gets to see all the numbers. The recipes Daniel and I created together are still on the menu, because good bread is good bread, no matter who baked it first. But there's one more thing. A few months after everything settled, I was going through old boxes in storage, the kind of boxes you never open, just move from place to place, and I found something I hadn't seen in years. A small, sealed envelope from my mother, given to me the week before she passed, with a note on the front that said open when you really need it. I'd forgotten about it completely. Inside was a savings bond and a short letter. I won't share everything it said, but one line has stayed with me ever since. You've always taken care of everyone else first. One day something is going to test whether you know how to take care of yourself. When that day comes, you will. She was right, it just took 14 years for me to find out.